The pounding on my front door didn't sound like an emergency. It sounded like authority. I opened it at 6 in the morning to find a deputy sheriff adjusting his belt, holding a document that said I was being evicted from my own house. He called it a writ of possession. I called it a mistake, but as I watched my neighbor's curtains twitch across the street, I realized the paper was real, and the betrayal was just beginning. The pounding on the door was not the rhythm of a neighbor delivering a package or a friend stopping by with news. It was a flat, authoritative thud that vibrated through the wood and into the floorboards, traveling all the way up to my bedroom where I lay frozen under the duvet. The digital clock on my nightstand read 6 in the morning. The sky outside the window was still the bruised purple of early dawn. I was 33 years old, a woman with a salary, a 401(k), and a terrifying habit of assuming that if I followed the rules, the world would leave me alone. I threw off the covers, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled on a robe, knotting the sash tight around my waist as if it could hold me together. When I opened the door, the cold morning air hit my bare shins. Standing on my porch was a man in a beige uniform, a wide-brimmed hat, and a utility belt heavy with equipment. He looked tired. He looked like he had done this 3 times already this morning. "Gabriella Murphy?" he asked. He did not look at my face. He looked at the clipboard in his hand. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded thin, like dry leaves scraping together. "I am a deputy sheriff for the county. I am here to execute a writ of possession regarding this property." He handed me a stack of papers stapled at the top corner. The paper was heavy. Legal weight. I stared at the words without reading them. Writ of possession. Superior Court. Immediate vacancy. "I think there is a mistake," I said. "I own this house." "Well, the bank owns it, but I pay the mortgage. I am not a tenant." The deputy finally looked at me. His eyes were not unkind, but they were practiced. He had seen denial in all its flavors. "The order is signed by a judge. Ma'am, it lists you as an unauthorized occupant. The eviction is effective immediately. You have 24 hours to vacate, but legally, possession turns over to the plaintiff as of this morning." He pointed to a line on the front page. Plaintiff. OBS Holdings, LLC. I had never heard of OBS Holdings, LLC. "This is impossible," I said, and I felt the first prickle of hysterical tears behind my eyes. "I pay my bills. I have never missed a payment. You can check. I do not check payments, ma'am. I serve orders." I looked past him, across the street. Mrs. Gable was standing in her front window, holding her coffee mug with both hands, staring right at me. The curtain twitched as she adjusted her angle. I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck, burning through the chill of the morning. Shame is a physical thing. It tastes like copper and feels like fever. "I need to call someone." I said. "You can make calls," the deputy said. He stepped back, giving me a foot of space, a small mercy. "But I cannot leave until I have confirmed you understand the order. You need to start gathering your essentials. Medications, documents, clothes for a few days. Do you have somewhere to go?" I stood there, barefoot on the welcome mat I had bought at a craft fair 3 years ago. It said, "Welcome home" in cheerful, looping script. "I have nowhere to go." I said, "Because I live here." He sighed, a short exhale through his nose. "My advice? Go to the courthouse. Civil Division. Ask to see the file. Sometimes things happen, defaults happen, but right now, this paper is the law." He waited while I took the stack of documents. I closed the door, locking it instinctively, as if the lock mattered anymore. I leaned my back against the wood and slid down until I was sitting on the foyer floor. The papers crunched in my hand. I needed to be rational. I was the reasonable daughter. I was the one who fixed things. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the kitchen, grabbing my phone from the charger. My fingers shook so badly I mistyped the passcode twice. I called my parents. My mother answered on the second ring. It was too fast. It was 6:15 in the morning. Usually, she would be asleep or just starting the coffee. "Gabriella?" she said. Her voice was clear, alert. "Mom," I said, trying to keep the panic from fracturing my voice. "There is a sheriff at my door. He says I am being evicted. He has a court order." There was a pause. It lasted only a second, but it felt heavy, filled with a silence that had texture. "Oh, sweetie," she said. She did not sound surprised. She did not scream. She did not ask what happened, or who is doing this. She sounded sad, resigned, like she was talking to a child who had scraped a knee after being told not to run. "Mom, did you hear me?" "A sheriff. He says I have to leave. It says an LLC owns the house. Gabriella, listen to me," she said, her voice dropping into that soothing, melodic register she used when she wanted to de-escalate a situation. "We knew this might happen. You have been so overwhelmed lately. We talked about this." "We never talked about this," I shouted. The sound of my own voice shocked me. The kitchen was too quiet. "You are shouting," she said gently. "This is what I mean. You get so worked up, and you forget things. Dad and I tried to explain it to you last month. You were having trouble with the accounts. You said you wanted us to handle the heavy lifting for a while. Remember?" I gripped the phone tight enough to turn my knuckles white. I did not remember that. I remembered telling them work was stressful. I remembered them asking to see my mortgage statements, to see if they could help me refinance for a better rate. I remembered handing over a folder of documents because my father said he knew a guy who could lower my interest by 2 points. I never said you could sell the house. I said, "We did not sell the house, Gabriella. We are protecting it. You are confused. You are just unstable right now. It is okay. We are going to fix it. Just do what the sheriff says. Don't cause a scene. You know how you get when you cause a scene." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a fraction of a second, I doubted my own brain. Had I agreed to this? Had I signed something during that Sunday dinner when I was exhausted and crying about my boss? No, I shook my head, standing alone in my kitchen. No, I would remember selling my home. "I am going to the courthouse," I said. "Gabriella." "Don't," my mother said, and the soothing tone sharpened into something brittle. "There is no need for that. Just come to our house. We have the guest room made up. We can handle the paperwork later. You do not need to go down there and embarrass yourself." The guest room made up? She expected me. I hung up. I did not pack clothes. I packed paper. I ran to the chaotic pile on my dining room table, the to-do pile I'd been ignoring because work was consuming 80 hours of my week. I dug through junk mail, takeout menus, and magazines. I was looking for a warning. You do not get evicted overnight. There had to be notices. I found nothing. No envelopes from the court. No certified letters from a law firm. Then, at the bottom of the stack, stuck to a flyer for a pizza place, I found a pink slip. It was the delivery receipt for a certified mail item, the kind the postman leaves when you are not home, but this one had been signed. I squinted at the signature line. It was dated 3 weeks ago. The signature was a jagged, unintelligible loop. It looked vaguely like C. Murphy. My father's name was Charles. But my father did not live here. He lived 20 minutes away in a pristine colonial with a manicured lawn. How could he have signed for my mail? I turned the slip over. It was crumpled, as if it had been in someone's pocket before being dropped on my table. I grabbed my purse, my laptop, and the folder of house documents I kept in the filing cabinet. I walked back to the front door. The deputy was waiting in his patrol car at the curb. He rolled down the window as I locked the door. "I am going to the courthouse," I said. "Good idea." He said, "You have until tomorrow morning to move the rest of your things. After that, the locks get changed." I got into my sedan. My hands were shaking so badly I had to use both of them to turn the key in the ignition. As I pulled away, I saw Mrs. Gable still watching. She didn't wave. Ridgeway Glen is the kind of suburb where people move to avoid drama. The lawns are green, the schools are well-funded, and the courthouse is a brick monolith that looks more like a library than a place where lives are dismantled. I parked in the visitor lot, costing me $12 I could scarcely afford to lose if I was about to be homeless. The air inside the courthouse smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and misery. I went through the metal detector. my shoes clacking loudly on the terrazzo floor. The line for the civil clerk's office wrapped around the velvet ropes. I stood behind a man in paint-stained overalls who smelled like turpentine. I checked my watch. 8:30. It took 45 minutes to reach the window. The clerk was a woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore reading glasses on a chain and looked at me with an expression of profound exhaustion. "I need to see a case file." I said, "I have the number." I slid the paperwork the deputy had given me under the glass partition. She took it without a word, typed the number into her computer, and frowned. "This case is closed," she said. "Judgment for possession was entered 4 days ago. I was never served." I said, "I didn't know about the hearing. The deputy showed up this morning." She looked at the screen again. Service was perfected. Personal service. "Affidavit says you accepted the summons on the 12th of last month at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was at work on the 12th. I said, "I work across the city. I can prove it." She shrugged. It was a small movement, barely lifting her shoulders. "You can file a motion to set aside the default," she said. "But the writ has already issued. You are asking to stop a train that has already left the station. I need to see the file." I insisted. "Please." She sighed and typed a command. "It is a digital file. I can print the complaint and the exhibits. It is 50 cents a page." I handed her my debit card. "Print it all." 10 minutes later, I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, the stack of warm paper on my lap. I forced myself to breathe. In, out. I looked at the complaint for unlawful detainer. Plaintiff. OBS Holdings, LLC. Defendant. Gabriella Murphy, and all unauthorized occupants. The narrative was simple and horrifying. It claimed that OBS Holdings, LLC, was the rightful owner of the property at 422 Maple Drive. It claimed that I, Gabriella Murphy, was occupying the premises without a lease and had refused to vacate after a 3-day notice to quit. I turned the page to the exhibits. Exhibit A was a deed, a corrective quitclaim deed, dated 2 months ago. I scanned the legalese. It transferred the property from Gabriella Murphy to Gabriella Murphy and OBS Holdings, LLC, as joint tenants, with right of survivorship. I stopped breathing. I had never signed this. I looked at the signature page. There was my name, and there was my signature. It looked like my signature. It had the loop on the G, the sharp spike on the M, but it was too neat. It lacked the hurried slant I had developed over 10 years of signing corporate memos. And then I saw it. Attached to the back of the deed was a document titled Consent to Joint Tenancy and Management Agreement. It was a dense block of text, but at the top, clipped to the corner in the scanned image, was a post-it note. It was a yellow square, scanned in black and white, but I knew the handwriting on it instantly. It was blocky, all caps, written with a heavy hand that indented the paper, filed as requested. Gabriella aware. Keep quiet for now. It was my father's handwriting. I felt the hallway spin. The floor seemed to tilt to the left. My father had written a note on a document that gave half my house to a stranger, and then told them to keep it quiet. I turned to the next page. Limited power of attorney. It was dated 6 months ago. It granted Charles and Elena Murphy the power to manage, convey, encumber, or dispose of real property in the event of my incapacity or unavailability. I remembered this document, or I remembered a version of it. I had signed a medical power of attorney before I went in for minor surgery last year, just in case. My mother had said, "Just so we can talk to the doctors, this was not a medical power of attorney, this was a financial weapon," and looking at the notary stamp at the bottom, I saw the date had been altered. A 3 had been turned into an 8 with a heavy pen stroke. "Excuse me?" I looked up. A woman was standing over me. She was younger than me, wearing a corduroy blazer and carrying a canvas messenger bag that looked heavy enough to break a shoulder. She held a clipboard against her chest. "I saw you at the window," she said. Her voice was low, confidential. "And I saw your face just now. Are you okay?" "I don't know," I said. I held up the paper. "They say I don't own my house." She sat down next to me, leaving a respectful distance. I am Sarah. I work for the Housing Rights Project downstairs. May I? She nodded at the papers. I handed them to her. She flipped through them with a speed that suggested she had seen this movie 100 times. She stopped at the corrective quitclaim deed. She stopped at the LLC name. OBS Holdings. She muttered. Of course. You know them? I asked. I know the law firm that represents them, she said. They run a volume business. Filings in bulk. They treat eviction court like a factory line. She pointed to the phrase, unauthorized occupant. This is the trick, she said. If they sued you for non-payment of rent, you could pay the rent and stay. If they sued you for a lease violation, you could cure it. But by calling you an unauthorized occupant, they are saying you have no right to be there at all. They are saying you are a squatter in your own home. It bypasses all the tenant protections. But I am on the deed, I said, or I was. She tapped the corrective deed. They added themselves. She said, This is title manipulation. It is getting common. Predatory investors find a way to get on the title, usually through a family member or a forged signature, and then they force a sale or an eviction. It is messy, civil litigation stuff, but they bring it here to eviction court because eviction court moves fast. Speed is their weapon. She looked at me, her eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. You said you were defaulted? Yes. They said I was served. Sarah grimaced. Default is hard to break. The judge will assume you are just trying to delay the inevitable. You need to file an emergency motion to stay the writ today. Before the sheriff changes the locks, she reached into her bag and pulled out a packet of forms. This is a template for an ex parte motion to stay execution of writ. You need to fill this out. State clearly that you were not served. State that the deed is fraudulent. Attach a copy of your driver's license to show your signature doesn't match if that is the case. But listen to me. This buys you days. Maybe a week. It does not fix the problem. I took the forms. They felt heavy. Heavier than paper should be. My father wrote this. I whispered, pointing to the scanned post-it note. That is his handwriting. Sarah looked at the note, then at me. Her expression softened, shifting from professional efficiency to something sadder. Family cases are the hardest, she said gently. The betrayal is the point of entry. It is how they get the leverage. She stood up. Fill those out. Go back to the clerk. Ask for an immediate hearing with the duty judge. Do not leave the building until you have a signed order stopping the sheriff. If you go home without it, you will be sleeping in your car tonight. I spent the next 4 hours in a fugue state of writing and waiting. I filled out the forms on a ledge near the water fountain. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote, I did not sign this deed. I wrote, I was at work on the 12th. I wrote, I am the owner of this property. I stood in line again. I paid another filing fee with the credit card I kept for emergencies. I waited outside a courtroom door while a bailiff took my paperwork inside. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the bailiff came out. He handed me a single sheet of paper. Motion granted in part. Execution of writ stayed for 7 days. Hearing set for next Friday. 7 days. I had bought myself 1 week of life. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. My phone had 18 missed calls, 12 from my mother, 6 from my father. I did not call them back. I drove home. The house looked the same as it had when I left. But it felt different. It felt compromised. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence was absolute. I walked into the living room where I had left the half-packed boxes. My life was scattered on the floor. Books, framed photos, a throw blanket I loved. I sat down on the hardwood floor, right in the center of the mess. The adrenaline that had carried me through the courthouse began to drain away, leaving behind a cold, trembling exhaustion. I looked at the walls. I had painted them myself 2 years ago, a soft gray that was supposed to be calming. My parents had come over to help. My father had taped the trim. My mother had made sandwiches. We had laughed. We talked about this. She had said on the phone, "You are unstable." They were rewriting history. They were not just taking my house. They were taking my reality. They were banking on the fact that I was the reasonable one, the one who avoided conflict, the one who would crumble under the weight of authority and shame. They thought I would come to their guest room. They thought I would cry and let them fix it, which meant letting them take control. They had filed the paperwork, signed my name, and waited for the sheriff to do the dirty work. I pulled the corrective quitclaim deed out of my bag and laid it on the floor in front of me. I stared at the signature that wasn't mine. I thought about the certified mail slip with the unfamiliar scrawl. I thought about the medical power of attorney I had signed in a hospital gown. Trusting them with my life, I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them. I was 33 years old, and I was alone in a house that a stranger claimed to own. The trembling started in my hands and spread to my shoulders. I wasn't crying. I was vibrating with a frequency that felt like rage, but colder. I picked up my phone. I saw a text message from my mother, sent 10 minutes ago. "Gabriella, please pick up. We are so worried. We just want to help you." I looked at the message. I looked at the legal documents spread out like tarot cards of disaster. I did not reply. I stood up. I walked to the front door and engaged the deadbolt. Then I walked to the back door and checked the lock there. I went to the windows and checked the latches. I was not going to the guest room. I was not going to disappear. I went back to the living room, picked up a black marker from the packing supplies, and wrote on the side of a box, "Do not discard." Then I sat down to read the rest of the file. I needed to understand exactly how they had sold me out. I needed to know the price of my parents' love. The sun went down, casting long shadows across the floor. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the gray gloom, reading the fine print of my own destruction. And for the first time in my life, I decided not to be reasonable. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and anxious sweat. It was a smell I would come to associate with the dismantling of my life. But on that Tuesday morning, it just smelled like fear. I stood before Judge Holloway, a woman with a face carved from granite and eyes that seemed to have seen every lie ever told in the county of Ridgway Glen. I was alone at the plaintiff's table, my hands gripping the edge of the wood to keep them from trembling. Sarah, the tenant advocate I had met in the hallway, sat in the gallery. She could not represent me. She was not a lawyer, but her presence was a tether to reality. "Your Honor," I said, my voice sounding thin in the cavernous room. I was never served. I did not know this hearing was happening until the deputy knocked on my door yesterday morning. Judge Holloway looked over her spectacles at the file. She flipped a page, the sound loud in the silence. "The affidavit of service says you were personally served at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 12th. She said, "I was at work." I said, "I have time logs. I have badge swipes. It is impossible." The judge looked at the opposing counsel. He was not the high-powered attorney I expected. He was a young, bored-looking man in a suit that did not quite fit. Checking his watch as if he had a lunch reservation he was afraid of missing. "Mr. Henderson?" the judge asked. "Standard service, Your Honor," he said without looking up. "Verified by a registered process server. We have a judgment. The plaintiff has title. This is a delay tactic." The judge looked back at me. She studied my face, perhaps looking for the telltale signs of a professional squatter or a desperate liar. I tried to stand straighter. I tried to look like the project manager I was, not the terrified daughter I felt like. "I am granting a stay of 7 days," Judge Holloway said finally. She stamped a document with a heavy thud. "Thank you," I breathed. "Do not thank me yet." "Ms. Murphy," she said sharply, "I am staying the writ to give you time to file a formal motion to set aside the default judgment. But I am warning you right now, the burden is on you. You have a signed deed against you. You have a process server's affidavit against you. If you come back here next week with nothing but your word, the sheriff will be back at your door before lunch. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. 7 days. I walked out of the courtroom feeling not like I had won, but like I had been granted a stay of execution. I went straight to the county recorder's office. I needed to see the enemy. The online portal was slow. the wheels spinning on the screen of the public terminal while I tapped my foot against the linoleum. When the property record finally loaded, I felt a wave of nausea. There it was. Corrective quitclaim deed. I clicked the image. It had been recorded 2 months ago. The document was a masterpiece of legal gibberish. It stated that the previous deed, the one solely in my name, had contained an error in vesting. To correct this error, the property was being transferred from Gabriella Murphy, an unmarried woman, to Gabriella Murphy and OBS Holdings, LLC, as tenants in common. They had not taken my name off the title. They had added a parasite. I read the fine print. By making us tenants in common, they had created a legal foothold, and then, referencing the consent agreement attached to the eviction filing, they claimed I had agreed to let them manage the property, since I was now occupying the property without their permission as the managing partner. I was an unauthorized occupant. It was circular logic designed to bypass landlord-tenant laws. If I was a tenant, I had rights. If I was a trespasser on my own property, I had none. I printed the document. The cost was $2. I stared at the notary block. Robert Vance. I did not know a Robert Vance. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to get them. My parents lived in a subdivision called the Oaks, a place where the mailboxes were brick and the grass was cut to a uniform height of 2 inches. I drove there with the radio off, the silence in the car heavy and suffocating. I parked in their driveway. My father's truck was there, polished and gleaming. My mother's sedan was parked next to it. It looked like a normal Tuesday. It looked like safety. I walked to the front door and used my key. I still had a key. The irony tasted bitter in my throat. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. They were in the sunroom at the back of the house. My mother was arranging flowers in a vase. My father was reading a tablet. They looked up as I entered, and for a split second, I saw something flash across their faces. Not guilt, annoyance. "Gabriella," my mother said, wiping her hands on a towel. "We have been calling you. We were so worried. Why didn't you answer?" I walked to the wicker coffee table and slammed the stack of papers down. The sound made the vase rattle. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was steady, which surprised me. I thought I would be screaming. My father set his tablet down. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We told you not to go to the courthouse, Gabriella," he said. He sounded disappointed. "You forged my signature," I said. "You transferred half my house to an LLC I have never heard of. You tried to evict me." "We did not try to evict you," my mother said, moving toward me with her hands out, palms up. "We are trying to save you." "Save me from what?" I demanded. "I pay my mortgage. I have a job. I have excellent credit. Or I did. Until you messed with it. You are drowning." "Gabriella," she said, her voice rising to a pitch that usually signaled tears were coming. "You just don't see it. You have been so erratic lately. Spending money, not returning calls. We saw the statements. You were going to lose that house eventually." I stared at her. I had never missed a payment. I saved 20% of my income. "What statements?" I asked. "Show me the statements." My father stood up. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who commanded a room just by sighing. "We took out a loan," he said, "to cover your debts. The LLC is just a holding company for the lender. It is a bridge loan. We had to put them on the title to secure it. It was the only way to stop the bleeding." "I have no debts," I shouted. "You do," he said calmly. "You just don't remember them. This is what we are talking about. The stress has gotten to you." He picked up the papers I had thrown down and straightened them. "Look," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "We fixed it. The eviction is just a formality. It is a legal mechanism to clear the title so we can restructure the loan. You were supposed to move in here for a few months anyway. We have the room. We can take care of you. Why are you making this so hard?" I looked from my father to my mother. They stood together, a united front of concern and benevolence. If I didn't know the truth, if I hadn't seen the impossible signature, the fake service date, I might have believed them. They were so convincing. They believed their own narrative. I gotta stay. I said, the judge gave me 7 days. I am not moving out. My mother's face hardened. The concern evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. If you fight this, Gabriella, she said, you are going to embarrass this family. Do you want the neighbors to know your business? Do you want to be dragged through the public record? I pointed at the eviction order. You already put me in the public record. You sent a sheriff to my door. If you keep this up, my father said, cutting her off, we will stop helping entirely. We will wash our hands of it. And when that LLC comes for the full amount, and you are on the street, do not come crying to us. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw the lines around my mother's mouth, the way my father clenched his jaw. They weren't afraid for me. They were afraid of me. I picked up my papers. I am not coming to you. I said, I am getting a lawyer. My father laughed. A short, dry bark. With what money? He asked. We control the equity now. I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it strictly, latching it tight. The next morning, I sat in the waiting room of Marlowe and Klein Legal Group. It was not a fancy firm. The carpet was worn in the high-traffic areas, and the magazines on the table were 3 months old, but the tenant advocate, Sarah, had given me a name. I met with an associate named David Park. He looked young, tired, and sharp. He listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I showed him the corrective deed, he stopped writing. This is a quiet title issue, he said. He tapped the paper with his pen, but they have dressed it up as an eviction to speed it up. It is clever, evil, but clever. Can you stop it? I asked. David leaned back in his chair. It is going to be expensive to fight a quiet title action, he said honestly. You are looking at a civil suit. We have to prove fraud. That means handwriting experts, depositions, subpoenas. I have $5,000 in savings. I said, that is it. He grimaced. That will get us through the initial filings. But I can do this. I can take the eviction defense on a limited scope. We stop the bleeding first. Then we figure out how to cut out the tumor. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper. Here is the strategy. We attack the service, if you weren't served. The court has no jurisdiction. We attack the deed. If the signature is forged, the deed is void ab initio, from the beginning, and we attack the standing. An unauthorized occupant claim requires a specific set of facts they don't have. He looked at the name of the LLC again. OBS Holdings. You know, he said, frowning. I have seen this name, or names like it. Oakbridge Property Solutions. What is that? I asked. They are a property services company. They buy distressed assets, usually tax liens, foreclosures. They are known for fast turnover. They buy, evict, flip. They are aggressive. He typed something into his computer. Look at the address for the LLC, he said. Turning the screen toward me, it was a suite number in a strip mall in a neighboring town. That is a mail drop, David said. A UPS store. This LLC is a shell. It exists solely to hold your deed and file this lawsuit. If we pierce it, we might find Oakbridge at the bottom. Why would my parents work with a company like that? I asked. David looked at me with sympathy. People get desperate. Gabriella, maybe your parents needed money. Maybe Oakbridge offered them a way to unlock the equity in your house without you knowing. Your parents get a payout. Oakbridge gets the house. And you get, well, you get evicted. I felt cold. My parents had sold me. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had sold me to a predator. I left the law office with a retainer agreement signed and a heavier heart. On my way home, I stopped by the courthouse to check for any new postings on my file. The deputy sheriff, the one who had come to my door, was coming out of the building. He saw me and stopped. He touched the brim of his hat. Ms. Murphy, he said, you got the stay? Yes, I said. 7 days. He nodded, looking around to make sure no one was listening too closely. I am not supposed to say this, he said, his voice low. But when I went back to the office yesterday, I checked my log. I have served 5 writs of possession in the last month for that same law firm, all of them at 6 in the morning, all of them defaults. Is that unusual? I asked. He shifted his weight. Evictions happen, but usually, people know they are coming. These folks, they all looked like you. Total shock. Working people, nice houses. He looked me in the eye. Document everything. Ms. Murphy, if you see anything weird, write it down. The sheriff's office executes the orders. But we do not like being used as muscle for a scam. He walked away before I could thank him. When I got home, I felt a new kind of urgency. It wasn't just my parents. It was a pattern. I sat down at my computer and did something I should have done days ago. I pulled my 3-bureau credit report. I had to answer security questions to get in. What is the monthly payment on your auto loan? Which of these addresses have you lived at? When the report generated, I scrolled past the green check marks of my student loans and my credit cards. I stopped at the section labeled Inquiries. There was a hard inquiry from OBS Financial Services, dated 3 months ago, and below that, a new account. It was a personal loan for $300,000. Originated 2 months ago. Status: current. The address on the loan was my parents' address. I stared at the number, $300,000. That was nearly the entire equity of my home. They hadn't just taken a small loan to cover my alleged debts. They had drained the house. They had cashed me out. I printed the report. My hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of discovery. I needed to know how they did it. How did they convince a lender I was me? I went to the closet where I kept my old files. I was looking for my passport, my birth certificate, anything they might have accessed. I pulled down a box of old papers from college. I sifted through transcripts and old essays. At the bottom, I found a manila folder labeled Gabriella, medical. It was my mother's handwriting. I opened it. Inside were copies of my vaccination records, my eye prescriptions, and a stack of blank forms. I pulled out the top form. It was a HIPAA release and authorization. It was signed by me, but the date was blank. I remembered signing this. I was 22, going in for wisdom teeth removal. My mother had handed me a stack of forms at the oral surgeon's office. Just sign these, honey, so I can pick up your prescription. I flipped to the next form. Durable power of attorney for healthcare, signed, date blank. Next form, general power of attorney. My breath hitched. It was a standard statutory form. It gave the agent full power to transact business, banking, real estate, and legal claims. It was signed by me. The date was blank. I sat back on my heels, the room spinning. They had been stockpiling these for years. Every time I had a minor medical procedure, every time I needed help with a tax return in college, they had slipped a blank form into the pile. They had a library of my signatures, authorized and notarized by friends of theirs, just waiting for a date to be filled in. They hadn't just decided to do this 3 months ago. They had been prepared to do this for a decade. The medical release wasn't just about health. It was a narrative. If they could prove I was medically incompetent, unstable, as my mother kept saying, they could activate these powers and no one would question them. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. You knew this was coming. You are forgetful. She wasn't just gaslighting me. She was building a witness list. If this went to court, she would testify that I had been mentally declining. She would show these forms as proof that they had been caring for me for years. A cold clarity settled over me. It was a physiological shift. The frantic, pleading daughter died in that closet. I didn't want to call them and ask why anymore. I didn't want their apology. I wanted to beat them. I started observing. I closed my eyes and replayed the conversation in the sunroom. My mother mirrored my phrases. When I said I'm getting a lawyer, she had stiffened, but she hadn't asked who. She had looked at my father. She was checking for cues. My father spoke in fragments. Bridge loan, security, structure. He was using words he didn't fully understand, words he had likely heard from someone else, someone at Oak Bridge. And the most damning thing of all, Neither of them had asked if I was okay. Not once. They had asked about the house. They had asked about the neighbors. They had asked about the family reputation. But they had not asked how I was sleeping, or if I had eaten, or where I was going to live. I was not a daughter to them. I was an asset. And right now, I was a distressed asset. I spent the rest of the night organizing. I bought a binder. I punched holes in the credit report, the eviction notice, the deed, the blank forms. I needed one more thing. I needed to break the deed. David, the lawyer, had said we needed to prove fraud. Forgery is hard to prove. Experts disagree. But a structural impossibility? That is proof. I pulled up the corrective deed on my laptop again. I zoomed in on the notary stamp. Robert Vance. Commission expires June 2026. I opened a new tab and searched for Robert Vance Notary Ridgeway Glen. A few results came up: a LinkedIn profile, a listing in a business directory, and an obituary. I clicked the link. It was from a local funeral home. Robert Vance, 68, passed away peacefully on November 14th after a long battle with cancer. I looked at the date on the deed. It was notarized on January 12th, 2 months after he died. I stared at the screen. A dead man had notarized the document that stole my house. The fear that had been gripping my chest for 48 hours loosened, replaced by a cold, hard knot of resolve. They had been sloppy. They had used an old stamp, or someone had stolen it, not realizing the man was in the ground. I printed the obituary. I punched holes in it. I placed it at the very front of my binder. I closed the binder. The snap of the ring sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. The filing of a motion in the Superior Court is not a dramatic event. There is no slamming of gavels or breathless hush in the gallery. It is a quiet, bureaucratic act, performed over a counter behind safety glass. David Park, my attorney, slid a stack of documents 3 inches thick toward the clerk. The sound of the paper hitting the laminate counter was the only noise in the room. We are filing a motion to set aside default judgment, a motion to quash service, and a request for sanctions. David said. The clerk stamped them. Received. 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 That was it. The war had officially begun. We walked out into the corridor. David loosened his tie. Now we wait, he said. The court is backed up. The judge might not hear this for 2 weeks, but because we filed the emergency stay, the sheriff cannot touch you. You are in limbo. Gabriella. But you are safe in the house for now. Limbo. It was a terrible place to live. Every time a car slowed down outside my window, my pulse spiked. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a phantom vibration in my teeth. The eviction clock was still ticking, just muffled by a layer of paperwork. I could not just sit in the house and wait for a judge to read a file. I needed to understand the scope of what had happened to me. I spent my evenings at the public library, using their computers because I was paranoid that my home IP address was somehow being monitored. It was irrational, but trauma makes you irrational. I logged into the county land records portal. I had the name of the notary, Robert Vance, the dead man. I searched his name. The results populated the screen. Page after page of them. Robert Vance had been a very busy man in the afterlife. I started clicking on the documents: corrective deed, affidavit of death of joint tenant, quitclaim deed. They followed a pattern so specific it felt like a signature. Step 1. A property owned by an elderly person or a single professional, someone isolated. Step 2. A correction filed to the title, adding an LLC as a co-owner. Step 3. The notary stamp of Robert Vance, always dated within the last 6 months, long after his obituary said he had died. I printed them all. I taped them to the wall of my dining room, connecting them with sticky notes like a detective in a bad movie. But this was not a movie. These were real houses. 412 Elm Street, 880 Oak Avenue, 12 Briarwood Lane, all of them in Ridgeway Glen, all of them with Oakbridge or OBS or OPS listed as the new co-owner. I noticed something else. The names of the original owners often matched the names on the grantee line, but with a slight variation. Michael J. Miller became Michael Miller. Sarah Ann Lewis. Became Sarah Lewis. It was the kind of sloppy detail that slipped past a weary clerk but screamed fraud to anyone paying attention. I needed to know how these were getting into the system. A physical person had to be handing these to the county recorder. I took a morning off work. I had told my boss I was dealing with a family medical emergency, which was technically true, and went to the county assessor's office. It was in the basement of the administrative building, a room that smelled of dust and decaying paper. I waited until the line thinned out, then approached the counter. The technician was a man with deep circles under his eyes and a coffee stain on his shirt. His name tag said Marcus. He looked like he hated his job. That made him perfect. I need help understanding how a document was recorded, I said, sliding the copy of my corrective deed across the counter. I pulled the dead notary obituary out of my bag and slid that across, too. Marcus looked at the deed. Then he looked at the obituary. He didn't blink. He didn't gasp. He just let out a long, weary sigh. I didn't record this, he said defensively. I know. I said, I just want to know who did. Was it a walk-in? A messenger service? He typed the document number into his terminal. He squinted at the screen. E-recording. He said, What is that? Electronic recording. Third-party vendors. Title companies, banks, and authorized heavy volume filers don't come in here. They scan the docs at their office and upload them through a secure portal. We just verify the formatting and margins. If the pixels look right, we stamp it. He turned the screen slightly so I could see. Vendor code 8842. Who is 8842? I asked. Marcus tapped a few keys. Oakbridge Property Solutions. He read. They have a bulk account. So nobody at the county actually looks at the wet ink signature? I asked. Nobody checks the notary stamp against the state registry to see if the guy is alive? Marcus laughed. It was a hollow, dry sound. Lady, we record 400 documents a day. We check for margins, fees, and legibility. We are not detectives. If the vendor says it is valid, we record it. The liability is on them. He lowered his voice. But I will tell you this, that vendor code, 8842, we have had a lot of calls about them lately, mostly from people like you. Confused, angry. Can you print that screen? I asked. The one showing the vendor code? He hesitated. Strictly speaking, it was internal data. I pushed the obituary closer to him. Please, Marcus, they took my house. He looked at the door to the supervisor's office. It was closed. He hit print. Thank you, I whispered. It is not proof of guilt, he said, sliding the warm paper across the counter. But it proves they didn't walk it in. It came from inside their system. I walked out with the vendor log. It was a thread, a thin digital thread that connected the fraud directly to Oakbridge's office. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I froze. I was in the kitchen, making toast. The fear was immediate and chemical. Was it the deputy again? Had the stay been lifted? I crept to the peephole. It was my parents. My mother was holding a casserole dish covered in foil. My father was holding 2 large coffees from the bakery I used to love. They looked normal. They looked like parents visiting their daughter on a weekend. I debated not opening the door. I could pretend I wasn't home, but my car was in the driveway, and the do not discard box was visible through the living room window. I opened the door, but I stood in the frame, blocking the entrance. What do you want? I asked. Gabriella. Honey, my mother said. Her eyes were red-rimmed, puffy. She looked like she hadn't slept. We brought breakfast. Can we just come in and eat? We miss you. My father looked at the ground. He looked smaller than I remembered. We are not here to fight, he said quietly. We just want to talk. Please. I looked at the casserole. It smelled like eggs and sausage. It smelled like childhood. My stomach betrayed me. It growled. I was exhausted. I was lonely. I wanted, more than anything, for this to be a misunderstanding. I wanted them to be the parents who cheered at my college graduation, not the people who forged my name on a deed. Okay, I said. 5 minutes. I stepped back. They walked in and set the food on the dining table. right next to my wall of investigation. The taped-up deeds, the obituary, the sticky notes. My mother glanced at the wall. She flinched, as if she had been slapped. But she didn't say anything. She started unpacking the food. "Here," she said, handing me a coffee. 2 sugars, just how you like it. I took the cup. The warmth seeped into my cold fingers. "We are sorry about the sheriff," my father said. He sat down at the table, keeping his back to the wall of evidence. "We didn't know they would do that. We thought they would just send a letter. You sold the house to them, Dad." I said, "You gave them the power to do it. I didn't sell it." He insisted. "I leveraged it. There is a difference." He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded document. It wasn't a court form. It was a simple, clean white paper. "Look," he said. "We talked to the investors, Oakbridge. We told them this was a mistake. We told them you are family. They agreed to a workaround." He slid the paper toward me. "It is a management and trust agreement," he said. "It is very simple. You sign this. And it puts the property into a family trust. We become the trustees. It satisfies their security requirement. They drop the eviction. The lawsuit goes away. You stay in the house. No sheriff, no court." My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. Her skin was soft, familiar. "Please, Gabriella," she said, tears spilling over her lashes. "This has gone too far. We don't want you to be homeless. We don't want you to fight a big company. You will lose. They have millions of dollars. Just sign this, and we can go back to being a family. We can fix the debt together." I looked at the paper. It was short, 2 pages. It looked so harmless. The undersigned grantor, Gabriella Murphy, hereby appoints Charles and Elena Murphy as trustees. The temptation was overwhelming. I could end the terror right now. I could sign this paper, eat the casserole, and go back to sleep. I could stop worrying about the deputy. I could stop paying David Park money I didn't have. I picked up a pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. "Just sign it, honey," my mother whispered. "Let us take care of you." I looked at the text one more time. I forced myself to read the paragraph above the signature line. "Trustees shall have full and exclusive authority to encumber, lease, sell, or otherwise dispose of the trust corpus at their sole discretion, without further consent from the grantor. Disposal authority." The words floated off the page. Dispose. They weren't saving the house. They were getting me to sign a document that let them sell it immediately. Without a court order, without an eviction, without a fight. The eviction had stalled, so they were trying to trick me into opening the back door. I looked at the wall behind my father. I looked at the obituary of Robert Vance. I put the pen down. "No." I said, "What?" my father said. His voice was sharp. I said, "No." "Gabriella, be reasonable," my mother pleaded. "This is the only way out." "No, it isn't," I said. I folded the paper in half, then in half again. I stood up. "This gives you the right to sell the house tomorrow," I said. "You aren't trying to stop the eviction. You are trying to finish it." My father stood up. The wounded posture vanished. He loomed over the table. "You are making a mistake," he said. "You are being stubborn and stupid. You think you can win against these people? They will crush you. We are giving you a lifeboat. You are the ones who threw me overboard," I shouted. "Get out." My mother stood up, wiping her eyes. The tears stopped instantly. "You are an ungrateful child," she spat. "After everything we did for you." "Get out!" I screamed. They left. My father snatched the document off the table before he walked out. He didn't look back. My mother slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood in the silence, looking at the cooling casserole. I didn't eat it. I threw it in the trash, foil and all. The next day, I met with David Park. I told him about the visit. That was a close call. He said grimly, "That document would have mooted our entire defense. If you had signed that, the court would have said you voluntarily gave up possession." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Gabriella, we need to talk about court. The hearing is in 4 days. I am ready." I said, "You are not ready. he said. You are angry, and you are hurt, and in a courtroom. Those two things make you look unstable. He opened a file. Your parents are going to be there. They will be sitting behind the plaintiff's attorney. They will look like nice, retired people. They will look concerned. They will probably cry. And you? You are the daughter who is suing her own parents. You are the woman claiming a conspiracy. If you get up there and scream, or cry hysterically, or look like you are about to snap, the judge is going to believe their narrative, the narrative that you are mentally unwell and they are just trying to help. I swallowed hard. He was right. So what do I do? You have to be ice, David said. You have to be boring. You have to be so calm it makes them uncomfortable. You answer yes or no. You do not explain. You do not plead. You let the documents scream for you. He handed me a business card. This is Dr. Evans. She is a therapist who works with high-conflict family trauma. I want you to see her, not just for your mental health, although God knows you need it, but because I want a record that you are seeking professional support and that you are lucid, grounded, and rational. I took the card. We are fighting a narrative. Gabriella. David said, they are telling a story about a crazy daughter. We need to tell a story about a calculated fraud. I started seeing Dr. Evans 2 days later. She was a calm woman with a soft voice and an office that didn't smell like fear. I told her everything, the forms in the closet, the gaslighting, the way my mother's voice changed when she didn't get what she wanted. It is called financial abuse. Dr. Evans told me. It is often harder to recognize than physical abuse because it comes wrapped in the language of care and protection, but the goal is the same: control. They render you dependent so you cannot leave. She taught me grounding techniques. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch. You are not a child anymore. Gabriella, she said, in that courtroom, you are a witness. You are a reporter reporting on a crime that happened to someone else. Detach. Observe. I practiced in the mirror. I practiced keeping my face neutral. I practiced answering questions without letting my voice shake. While David prepared the legal arguments, I kept digging into the practical side of the scam. Why eviction? Why not just foreclose? Sarah, the tenant advocate, explained it to me over coffee. Foreclosure takes a year, she said. It requires notices, publication, auctions. It gives the homeowner a right of redemption. It is messy and slow. She stirred her black coffee. But eviction? Eviction takes 3 weeks. If they can get a judgment that says you are an unauthorized occupant, they get possession instantly. Once they have possession, they change the locks. Then they sell the house to a third party, usually another shell company, for a fraction of the value. By the time you manage to file a civil lawsuit to get the title back, the house is gone. It has been sold twice. You are suing for money. But you never get the home back. It is a title cleansing operation. I realized. Exactly, Sarah said. They use the eviction court as a laundry service. I needed to know if they had already started the laundry cycle on my house. I walked over to Mrs. Gable's house, the neighbor who had watched the sheriff serve me. I hadn't spoken to her since that morning. I felt ashamed. She opened the door, looking surprised. Gabriella, she said, I didn't know if you were still there. I saw the police. I am still here, Mrs. Gable. I said, I am fighting it. It is a mistake. She looked relieved. Oh, thank goodness. I told my husband. Gabriella isn't a criminal, Mrs. Gable. I have a weird question. Have you seen anyone at my house when I'm at work, besides my parents? She thought for a moment. Well, yes, she said, about 3 weeks ago. There was a man. He had a clipboard and a camera. He was walking all around the perimeter of your house, taking pictures of the roof, the backyard. What did he look like? He was wearing a polo shirt, green. It had a logo, Summit Surveying or something like that. I thought maybe you were refinancing. I felt a chill. Did he go inside? No, Mrs. Gable said. He just took pictures of the outside. And he had a drone. He flew a drone over the roof. Thank you. Mrs. Gable, a survey, a marketing package. They were preparing the listing. They had done the due diligence to sell the house before they even had the legal right to enter it. They were that confident I would fold. Sarah called me that afternoon. I found 2 more. She said, 2 people who are fighting OBS holdings in other counties. They are willing to talk to you. We met in the back room of the library. It felt like a conspiracy meeting. There was a man named Elias, a teacher in his 40s, and a woman named Joy, a nurse. My story was exactly the same. Elias said, he looked tired. My mom passed away. I inherited the house. Suddenly, I see a corrective deed filed. It added an LLC as a joint tenant. Then, 3 weeks later, I get an eviction notice. They said I was a squatter in my childhood home. Who was the notary? I asked. Robert Vance. Elias said. I put my hand on the table. Robert Vance died in November. I said. Elias's eyes went wide. Joy gasped. My deed is dated December. Joy said. We sat there in the silence of shared violation. We weren't just victims of bad luck. We were victims of a machine that ate equity and spit out homelessness. We need to tell the judge this. Joy said. We can't. I said. Not yet. This is eviction court. The judge only cares about possession. But my lawyer is trying to get the judgment set aside. If he does, we can file a civil class action. I looked at them. I am going to court on Friday. I said, if I win, it opens the door for you. If I lose, you won't lose, Elias said. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. Here, take my documents. Show the judge it isn't just you. I took the folder. It felt heavy with trust. The night before the hearing, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. I didn't recognize the number. It was blocked. I sat on my bed, the darkness of the room pressing in on me. I pressed play. It was my father's voice, but it wasn't the gentle, confused voice he used in front of my mother. It was the voice he used when he was talking business on the phone. Low, flat, devoid of emotion. Gabriella, we know you are talking to people. We know you went to the assessor. You need to stop. You are confused, and you are hurting the family. The offer for the trust is still open until tomorrow morning. After that, we can't protect you. He paused. The silence on the recording was filled with static. If you make us do this in public, you will lose more than the house. You know what I mean. Think about your future. Think about your reputation. Don't force our hand. The message ended. You will lose more than the house. I knew what he meant. He meant the medical forms. He meant the narrative of insanity. He meant he would stand up in open court and testify that his daughter was mentally incompetent, that she hallucinated, that she couldn't be trusted with a checkbook, let alone a property. He would burn my credibility to the ground to save his investment. I saved the voicemail. I emailed it to David. Then I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked scared. But I didn't look crazy. I went to my closet and picked out my clothes for court. A navy blue suit, a white blouse, conservative heels, the uniform of the reasonable woman. I laid the binder on the chair next to the suit, the binder with the dead notary, the e-recording log, the credit report, and the statements from Elias and Joy. I wasn't going to be the daughter tomorrow. I wasn't going to be the victim. I was going to be the evidence. David Park called me into his office at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. He did not offer me coffee. He did not ask how I was sleeping. He had a document spread out on his desk, pinned down by his elbows as if it were a live animal trying to escape. We found it. He said, Found what? I asked. I sat down, clutching my purse. I had become accustomed to bad news. I expected him to tell me the judge had vacated the stay or that the sheriff was en route. The motive. David said. He spun the document around. It was a deed of trust. It was recorded 6 months ago. I leaned in. The text was dense, but the numbers were clear. Principal amount, $350,000. The borrower was not me. The borrower was the Murphy Family Revocable Trust, but the collateral was my address, 422 Maple Drive. Look at the signature page. David said. I looked. There was my name, signed on the line for grantor, And below it, a small notation. By Charles Murphy, attorney in fact. They used the power of attorney. I whispered, the one with the blank date. David nodded. But look who the lender is. It isn't a bank. It is Vanguard Distressed Asset Fund. I don't know them. I said, I do, David said grimly. They are hard money lenders. They lend to people who can't get money anywhere else. The interest rate is 14%. And look at the terms. It is a balloon note. The full amount was due in 6 months. I did the math in my head. 6 months ago was August. The loan matured in February. That is now. I said, exactly. David said, your parents borrowed $350,000 against your house. They probably used it to pay off their own debts or fund some investment that went south. Now the note is due. They don't have the cash, so the lender is squeezing them. He tapped the paper. The eviction isn't about control, Gabriella. Or at least, not just about control. It is a rescue mission. They promised the lender they would sell the house to pay off the note, but they couldn't sell it with you living in it. So they transferred the title to the LLC, which is likely controlled by the lender or their partner, and filed the eviction to get you out. They are trying to liquidate you to save themselves. I felt a cold hollowness in my stomach. It was worse than I thought. They hadn't just stolen the house. They had gambled it and lost. So if I stay, I asked, if you stay, the lender forecloses on the trust. David said, and since your parents are the trustees and guarantors, the lender goes after their assets too, their house, their retirement, everything. They are drowning. I realized, and they are using me as a life raft. David sat back. We have mediation tomorrow, he said. They requested it. They are going to pressure you. They are going to tell you that you are ruining the family, and technically, they are right. If you win, they lose everything. You need to be ready for that wait. I walked out of his office into the bright, indifferent sunlight. I felt heavy. I carried the knowledge that my survival meant their destruction. It was a terrible equation. The mediation took place in a conference room at the courthouse. It was a neutral space, painted a sterile beige, with a long mahogany table that shone under fluorescent lights. David sat next to me. On the other side sat my parents. They looked impeccable. My father wore his navy blazer, the one he wore to church. My mother wore a pearl necklace and a soft cardigan. They looked like the victims. They looked like loving parents who had been dragged into a legal nightmare by a wayward child. Next to them sat their lawyer, Mr. Sterling. He was older than David, with silver hair and a voice like poured honey. Shall we begin? Mr. Sterling asked. He opened a leather folder. We are here to find a solution that benefits everyone. He said, my clients are heartbroken. They love their daughter. They only acted to protect the asset because Gabriella was struggling. He looked at me with a pitying smile. We understand that Gabriella has been under a great deal of stress, the missed payments, the confusion. There were no missed payments. David said sharply, we have the bank records. Mr. Sterling waved a hand dismissively. Mental payments. Mr. Park. The administrative burden. The family stepped in to manage the property. The transfer to the LLC was a financial restructuring to secure a loan that Gabriella benefited from. I didn't see a dime of that loan. I said, my voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. Mr. Sterling turned to me. Gabriella, he said gently, your parents used that money to secure your future, to pay off liabilities, to fix the foundation issues you told them about. I never had foundation issues. I said, see? My mother whispered loudly to my father. She doesn't remember. I felt the shaking start in my hands. It began in the fingertips and traveled up my wrists. It was the physical manifestation of gaslighting. My body was reacting to the dissonance between reality and their story. I put my hands under the table and pressed them hard against my thighs. 5 things I see, I told myself. The wood grain, the water pitcher, David's pen, my mother's pearls, the exit sign. We have a proposal. Mr. Sterling said. He slid a paper across the table. The plaintiff, OBS Holdings, will drop the eviction lawsuit, They will allow the record to be sealed so Gabriella has no eviction history. In exchange, Gabriella agrees to vacate the property within 30 days. The parents will provide a relocation assistance payment of $5,000, and they will help her find a suitable apartment. $5,000. My equity in the house was over $200,000. They were offering me pennies to walk away from my life. And the house? David asked. The house will be sold to satisfy the outstanding lien. Mr. Sterling said, it is unavoidable. The note is due. My father leaned forward. Gabby, he said. He hadn't called me Gabby since I was 12. Please, this is the only way. If the lender forecloses, we all get sued. They will come after our house, too. We will be wiped out. Just take the money. Let us help you start over. You can't handle a house like that anyway. It is too much for you. I looked at him. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the terror behind his eyes. He was begging me to save him from his own mistake. But the price was my sanity. The price was admitting I was incompetent. The price was letting them win. I looked at my mother. She was twisting a tissue in her hands. Please, honey, she said. Don't be selfish. Selfish. The word hung in the air. I took a deep breath. I felt the floor under my feet. I felt the chair against my back. No, I said. Mr. Sterling blinked. Excuse me? I said no. I repeated, I am not moving out. I am not incompetent, and I did not authorize that loan. Gabriella, my father snapped, his voice losing its softness. Do you have any idea what you are doing? You are bankrupting us. You bankrupted yourselves. I said, you stole my house to do it. My mother began to cry. It was a loud, ragged sound. She hates us. She wailed. She has always hated us. David stood up. I think we are done here, he said. We will see you in court. I stood up too. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced them to hold me. I didn't look back as we walked out. In the hallway, I had to lean against the wall. The adrenaline crash was dizzying. You did good, David said. He handed me a bottle of water. You held the line. I feel like I'm going to throw up. I said, that is normal, he said. Now, let's go get the evidence to bury them. We met the deputy sheriff at a diner 2 towns over. He was out of uniform, wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap. He looked nervous. I can't testify about the deed, he said, stirring his coffee. I am not a handwriting expert. We don't need you to testify about the deed, David said. We need you to testify about the service. The deputy nodded. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket. I checked the logs for the process server. The guy's name is Miller. On the day he claims he served you personally at 4 p.m, I have him serving a writ in a town 40 miles away at 3:30, and another one 20 miles in the opposite direction at 4:15. He tapped the page. Unless he has a helicopter. He didn't serve you. He is batch filing affidavits. He sits in his car, stamps a bunch of papers, and claims he served everyone. It is cheap. It is fast. And the collection agencies love him. Will you say that on the stand? I asked. The deputy looked at me. He looked at the fear that I was trying to hide. Yeah, he said. I took an oath. I don't like liars. It was a small win. But it was a crack in the foundation of their case. If the service was a lie, the default judgment was void. But we needed to link it to the parents. We needed to prove they knew. 2 days later, David emailed me a file. Subpoena response. https://w google.him/search?Q equals land record. pro.com. It was the metadata from the e-recording platform, the system that had uploaded the corrective deed. David called me as I opened it. Look at page 4, he said. I scrolled down. Upload. IP address 24.15.112.88. User account Oakbridge_vendor_main time of upload January 12th, 10:42 a.m. Now look at the login activity. David said, user login, C_Murphy_guests. Guest access. Granted. January 12th, 10:30 a.m. My blood ran cold. They gave him a guest login. David said, someone at Oakbridge created a guest account for your father. He logged in from his home computer. We can trace that IP next. And he uploaded the deed himself. Or he watched while they did it. He was in the system. I said, he wasn't just a passive beneficiary. David said, he pushed the button. I needed to confront her, not with a lawyer, not in a mediation room. I needed to look my mother in the eye and ask the question that had been haunting me. I drove to their house. I didn't park in the driveway. I parked on the street. I walked up the path, past the marigolds my mother planted every spring. I rang the bell. My mother opened it. She looked smaller without my father beside her. She looked tired. Gabriella, she said, Dad isn't here. He's at the lawyer's. I am not here to see Dad. I said. I walked past her into the living room. It was perfectly clean. Vacuum lines in the carpet, coasters on the tables, a shrine to order. I stood in the center of the room. Did you think I would just disappear? I asked. My mother stood by the door, her hand on the knob. What? When the sheriff came. When you filed the eviction. Did you think I would just vanish? Did you think I would evaporate? She walked into the room. Her face was tight. We thought you would come home. She said, we thought you would realize you couldn't handle it out there. We thought you would come back to your room. To my room? I laughed. It was a harsh sound. I am 33 years old. Mom, I have a career. I have a life you were ruining, she snapped. Her voice lost its tremble. It became hard. You were pulling away. Gabriella, you stopped coming to Sunday dinner. You stopped asking for advice. You were acting so independent. Is that a crime? I asked. It is when you leave your family behind, she shouted. She took a step toward me. You always acted like you were better than us, with your degree, and your city job, and your house that you bought without our help. You made your father feel small. Do you know that? You made him feel like he wasn't needed. I stared at her. The truth was finally out. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about the loan. The loan was just the symptom. The disease was resentment. I made him feel small because I paid my own bills? I asked. You made him feel irrelevant, she cried. He wanted to be the one to provide, and you just walked away. So yes, we took the house. We took it back, because we are the ones who know what is best for the family. Not you, never you. The mask was gone. There was no concern left. Only a deep, festering wound of narcissism. They couldn't stand that I was okay without them. So they had engineered a crisis to make me need them again. I looked at her. I felt a strange sense of peace, because now I knew. I didn't leave you behind. Mom. I said quietly, I just grew up. I turned to leave. As I walked out, I saw a box in the hallway. It was a cardboard file box, labeled Gabriella. Old files. It must have been pulled out recently, maybe when they were looking for documents for the lawyer. I stopped. I am taking this. I said, it is mine. You can't take that, she shouted. I picked it up. It was heavy. Watch me, I said. I walked out the door. She didn't try to stop me. She just stood in the doorway, watching me go. Her face twisted in a look of pure, unadulterated hate. I drove home with the box on the passenger seat. When I got inside, I locked the door and engaged the deadbolt. I sat on the floor and opened the box. It was a museum of control. There were copies of every report card I had ever received. There were bank statements from my high school savings account. There were printouts of my emails from college, emails I hadn't known they had access to. And there was a binder, a black 3-ring binder labeled Gabriella. Important. I opened it. The first page was a photocopy of my driver's license. The second page was a photocopy of my passport. The third page was a sheet of notebook paper. On it, someone had practiced my signature. Gabriella Murphy, Gabriella Murphy, Gabriella Murphy. The handwriting started out blocky. My father's hand. Then, line by line, it softened. It gained the slant. It gained the loop on the G. By the bottom of the page, it was indistinguishable from my own. I turned the page. There was a list of dates. January 12th, record deed. January 15th, file eviction. January 20th, sheriff. February 1st, loan maturity. It was a timeline. They had planned it out like a military operation. And then, I found the notes. Narrative strategy. 1. G is overwhelmed at work. 2. G is missing payments. Create evidence. 3. G had a breakdown in November. Cite Thanksgiving argument. 4. Request guardianship if she fights. Create evidence. I felt sick. Physically sick. They hadn't just reacted to a financial crisis. They had built a trap. They had planned to gaslight me into a guardianship if I resisted. They were willing to strip me of my legal rights as a human being just to cover their theft. I closed the binder. My hands were not shaking anymore. They were cold and steady. I knew what I had to do. I picked up the phone and called David. I have evidence of criminal intent. I said, "Bring it to me." He said, "No." I said, "I am going to the police station." There was a long silence on the line. David knew what this meant. This was the point of no return. Civil court is about money. Criminal court is about freedom. "Are you sure?" David asked. "Once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. They are your parents." I looked at the practice signatures. I looked at the line request guardianship. "If she fights, they are not my parents." I said, "They are identity thieves." The police station was loud and smelled of coffee and disinfectant. I sat at a metal desk across from a detective named Miller. He was young, skeptical. Identity theft is usually a civil matter when it is family. He said, not looking up from his form. I put the binder on the desk. I opened it to the page of practice signatures. I opened it to the narrative strategy. "This isn't a civil matter." I said, "This is fraud. This is forgery. And this is a conspiracy to deprive me of my property and my liberty." Detective Miller looked at the signatures. He looked at the timeline. He sat up straighter. "Who wrote this?" he asked. "My father." I said, "And who is the victim?" "I am." I said. He looked at me. He saw the bruises under my eyes. He saw the set of my jaw. "Okay," he said. "Let's start from the beginning." It took 3 hours. I gave a statement. I handed over copies of the binder. I handed over the e-recording logs. When I walked out of the station, I held a small slip of paper. Case number 24-88901. It was done. I had criminalized my family. I felt a wave of grief so profound I had to sit in my car and weep for 10 minutes. I wasn't crying for the parents I had. I was crying for the parents I wished I had. I was crying for the death of the illusion. The next morning, the court issued a ruling on the motion to lift the stay. David called me. Good news and bad news. He said, "Give me the good news." The judge denied their motion. The stay remains in place. He was disturbed by the service irregularities and the dead notary. He wants a full evidentiary hearing next month. You keep the house for now. And the bad news? Oakbridge knows they are losing control. And they know about the police report. The detective called your father for an interview. And they are escalating. They are desperate. The legal route is blocked, so they are going to try other ways. What does that mean? I asked. Lock your doors. Gabriella, David said. And get cameras. I hung up. I went to the window. A black sedan was parked across the street. The windows were tinted. It sat there, engine idling, a plume of white exhaust rising into the cold air. It wasn't a sheriff. It wasn't a neighbor. It was pressure. I went to the drawer and took out the hammer I used for hanging pictures. I walked to the front door and checked the lock. I was afraid. But I wasn't a child anymore. I opened my laptop and started typing a timeline for the detective. Let them come. I thought, I am the one with the receipts. I watched the black sedan through the blinds. The driver lit a cigarette. The cherry glowing red in the dusk. I didn't pull the curtains. I left them open. I wanted them to know I was watching back. The scope of my war expanded on a Tuesday afternoon in the back room of the Tenant Rights Project. It was a space that smelled of cheap coffee and damp wool, cluttered with flyers about rent caps and eviction moratoriums. Sarah, the advocate, who had found me in the courthouse hallway, introduced me to a man named Thomas Wright. He did not look like an investigator. He looked like a weary accountant, wearing a gray sweater and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. But he worked for the State Attorney General's office, in the Consumer Protection Division. "We have been tracking Oakbridge for 18 months, Thomas said. He spoke softly, placing a recording device on the table between us. "They are what we call a high-volume title stripper. They target properties with significant equity, usually owned by the elderly or the isolated. They use shell companies to confuse the chain of title. And they use the eviction court to bypass the foreclosure process." I nodded. It was exactly what David Park had told me. "But," Thomas continued, "usually, they work from the outside. They use tax liens or forged contractor disputes. Your case is different, Ms. Murphy. Your case involves inside actors, my parents." I said. The words tasted like ash. Thomas looked at me with sympathy, but his eyes were clinical. "Your parents provide the legitimacy," he said. "By using a family transfer, the corrective deed, they cloak the fraud in a domestic dispute. It makes the judges hesitant to intervene. It makes the police call it a civil matter. It is a very sophisticated variation." He tapped the binder I had brought. "This binder? The notes? The practice signatures? This is the Rosetta Stone. We have the pattern of the fraud. But you have the playbook. You have the intent." He asked me if I was willing to go on the record, not just for my case, but for the state's investigation. "If you do this," he warned, "it stops being a private family fight. You become a witness for the state. Your parents could face criminal charges, real ones, not just a slap on the wrist." I thought about the timeline in the binder. January 12th. Record deed. January 20th. Sheriff. They planned it. I said. They wrote it down. I am in. I said. While Thomas worked on the macro level, David Park and I worked on the micro level. We had to survive the hearing on Friday. The goal was simple. Prove the default judgment was based on a lie. If we can prove you were never served, the court loses jurisdiction. David explained, the judgment is void. The clock resets. We turned my life into a timeline. I pulled my badge access logs from work. January 12th, 8:45 in the morning. Badge in, main lobby. January 12th, 12:15 in the afternoon. Badge out. Cafeteria. January 12th, 12:45 in the afternoon. Badge in. Main lobby. January 12th, 6:30 in the evening. Badge out. Parking garage. The process server swore under penalty of perjury that he had handed me the papers at my front door at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I have a receipt too. I said, I was digging through my credit card app. Here. 4:10 in the afternoon. Starbucks near the office. I bought a latte and a scone. David took the screenshot. Perfect, he said. Unless you have a body double. You were 20 miles away from your front porch. It felt satisfying to build this wall of facts. Facts were clean. Facts didn't cry. Facts didn't tell you they loved you while stealing your home. But the emotional war was not over. On Wednesday night, my mother called. She didn't leave a voicemail. She texted, "We need to talk. Not about the house. Just family. Please. Gabriella. Dad is not sleeping. We are falling apart. Meet us for dinner. That Italian place you love. No lawyers. Just us." I stared at the screen. The Italian place was Mario's. We had gone there for every birthday since I was 10. It was the site of my graduation dinner, my promotion celebration. It was weaponized nostalgia. I showed the text to David. "Don't go." He said, "It is a trap. I have to go." I said, "Why?" "Because I need to know." I said, "I need to look them in the face one more time. I need to see if there is anything left." I drove to Mario's. The neon sign buzzed in the twilight. I parked my car and checked the recording app on my phone. I slipped the phone into my shirt pocket. the microphone facing out. They were waiting in a booth in the back. My father looked haggard. His skin was gray, and his hands shook slightly as he held his menu. My mother looked desperate. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, but her eyes were darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Gabriella. She breathed when she saw me. She stood up and hugged me. It was a fierce, desperate hug. I stood stiffly, my arms at my sides. "Sit down, honey," she said. "Please, order whatever you want. The lasagna is good tonight." I sat. I ordered water. "We missed you," my father said. His voice was raspy. "The house is too quiet." I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to fill it. "We are sorry about the police," my mother said. The detective called. It was humiliating to have a stranger ask about our family business. "It is not family business," I said. "It is fraud." "Gabriella, please," she hissed, lowering her voice. "Don't use that word. It is the legal word," I said. My father put his hand on the table. "We are in trouble." "Gabby," he said. "Real trouble. The loan. The people we borrowed from. They are not like the bank. They are calling us at night. They are threatening to take everything. The Oaks house. The retirement accounts." I felt a flicker of pity. Sharp and dangerous. They were terrified. "I can't help you." I said, "You stole my house to pay them." "We didn't steal it," my mother insisted. "We borrowed it. We were going to pay it back. We just needed time, and now everything is frozen because of your lawsuit." She reached into her purse. My stomach tightened. I knew this movement. "If you just sign this," she whispered, sliding a thick envelope across the tablecloth. "It is a new agreement. It is better than the last one. It says you can live in the house for 6 months, rent-free. We sell it. We pay off the loan, and we give you 10% of the remaining equity. 10% of my own house." I looked at the envelope. I didn't open it. "And the disposal authority?" I asked. "Who gets to sell it?" "We do," my father said. "We have to. The lender requires it." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike. The man who had co-signed my first car loan, legitimately. "You are asking me to jump on the grenade for you." I said. He looked down. "We are your parents," he whispered. "You owe us." The words hung there, heavy and ugly. "You owe us. For what? For raising me? For feeding me?" That was the contract of parenthood. It wasn't a loan to be called in when they made bad investments. I stood up. "I don't owe you my life," I said, "and I definitely don't owe you my house." "Gabriella, wait." My mother grabbed my wrist. Her grip was painful. "If you walk out now, we are done. Do you hear me? No Christmas, no birthdays. You will be an orphan." I looked at her hand on my wrist. I gently peeled her fingers off, one by one. "I think I've been an orphan for a long time," I said. I walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back at the booth. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I didn't start the engine. I sat there in the dark parking lot, surrounded by the smell of garlic and exhaust, and I cried. I didn't cry because I was scared. I cried because the fantasy was finally dead. I had held on to a tiny secret hope that they would say, "We are sorry. We messed up. Let's fix this together." But they didn't want to fix it. They wanted to consume me to save themselves. I drove home. I saved the recording. I labeled it dinner, coercion. The next day, the pressure shifted from emotional to financial. I received a call from an unknown number. "Ms. Murphy? This is Alan Symes. I represent the third-party interest in the property at Maple Drive." He meant Oakbridge, or the lender, or whatever shell company they were hiding behind today. "I have a lawyer," I said. "Call him, Mr." Symes chuckled. It was a smooth, corporate sound. "Lawyers are expensive. Mrs. Murphy. And slow. I am calling with a solution, a cash-for-keys offer." I listened. "We are prepared to offer you $25,000. He said, "Cash, wired to your account today. In exchange, you dismiss your motion, vacate the premises within 48 hours, and sign a non-disclosure agreement. $25,000. It was a lot of money. It was enough to rent an apartment, buy new furniture, and breathe for a few months. And the fraud? I asked. The forged deed? The dead notary? All claims released, he said. We wipe the slate clean. You walk away with cash. We take the house. No one goes to court. No one goes to jail. It was a bribe. They were trying to buy my silence before the hearing. If I sign that, I said, the investigation stops, Mr. Symes paused. I don't know what investigation you are referring to. He said carefully, but yes, the settlement would end all disputes. I thought about Elias, the teacher. I thought about Joy, the nurse. I thought about the hundreds of other people who had been bulldozed by this machine. If I took the money, I was letting them win. I was letting them do it to the next person. I am not for sale. I said, Ms. Murphy, be realistic. You are fighting a war of attrition. We can drag this out for 2 years. Can you afford legal fees for 2 years? I guess we will find out. I said. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt a strange surge of power. They were scared. You don't offer cash for keys if you are confident you are going to win in court. That evening, I did something that terrified me. Sarah asked me to speak at a community meeting at the local library. It was a gathering of housing advocates and tenants facing displacement. There were about 50 people in the room, sitting on metal folding chairs. I stood at the podium. I gripped the sides so hard my knuckles turned white. I had never spoken in public about this. I was a private person. I was the girl who sat in the back of the class. My name is Gabriella, I said. My voice wavered. I cleared my throat. My name is Gabriella Murphy, and 3 weeks ago, a deputy sheriff showed up at my door with an eviction order I had never seen. The room went quiet. I told them about the corrective deed. I told them about the term unauthorized occupant. I told them about how it looked like a legitimate court order, with stamps and signatures, but it was built on a foundation of lies. Professional paperwork is a weapon, I said. We trust things that look official. We trust things that have a case number. But sometimes, the paper is just a lie with a stamp on it. I looked out at the audience. I saw nodding heads. I saw Elias in the back row, giving me a thumbs up. They count on our shame, I said. My voice grew stronger. They count on us being too embarrassed to tell our neighbors. They count on us thinking we must have made a mistake. But we didn't make a mistake. We were targeted. When I finished, there was applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was angry, supportive applause. A woman came up to me afterwards. She was older, holding a cane. Honey, she said, they did the same thing to my sister. We thought she was just confused. We put her in a home. We sold the house to the people who claimed they owned it. She grabbed my hand. You keep fighting, she said. You fight for all of us. I walked home feeling less alone than I had in a month. I wasn't just Gabriella Murphy, the daughter who wouldn't move out. I was part of a resistance. 2 days before the hearing, David Park called me with a breakthrough. We found the process server, he said, or rather, we found his digital footprint. He shared his screen with me, the process server. A man named Gary Miller had filed affidavits in 5 different cases on January 12th. Case A, served at 8 a.m. in Ridgeway Glen. Case B, served at 8:15 a.m. in a town 40 miles south. Case C, served at 8:30 a.m. in a town 30 miles east. It is physically impossible, David said. Even if he was driving a Formula One car, he couldn't make those trips. He is robo-signing. This proves the fraud. I said, it proves the service is bad. David corrected. But here's the kicker. We looked into your parents' lawyer. Mr. Sterling, the one with the honey voice? The very same? It turns out Mr. Sterling isn't just a local family attorney. He is the registered agent for 3 LLCs in the state. And guess who owns those LLCs? Oakbridge? I guessed. Oakbridge. I sat back in my chair. So he isn't working for my parents. I said, hey. He is working for the people taking the house. David said, your parents think they hired a lawyer to help them navigate this loan, but the lender probably recommended him. Here, use our guy. He knows the paperwork. He is a double agent. I said, he is steering them into the wall. David said, He is advising them to reject settlements, to escalate the fight, to force the sale. He doesn't want to save them. He wants the collateral. My parents were being scammed too. They were the scammers, but they were also the marks. It was a nesting doll of exploitation. Does that change anything? I asked. It helps us, David said. We can argue that your parents are acting under undue influence or bad legal advice. It might give the judge a reason to pause everything. The escalation came the next afternoon. I was at work. I had finally gone back to the office, trying to salvage my job. The receptionist called me. Gabriella, there is a man here to see you, a process server. My heart stopped. Not again. I walked to the lobby. It was a different man this time. He handed me a thick envelope. Service for Gabriella Murphy. He said, I took it. I didn't open it until I was back at my desk. It wasn't an eviction notice. It was a filing in the probate court. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. Petitioner, Charles and Elena Murphy. Respondent, Gabriella Murphy. I read the allegations. The respondent has a history of mental instability. The respondent is currently suffering from delusions regarding property ownership. The respondent has ceased communication with family and is exhibiting erratic behavior. The petitioner requests immediate temporary powers to manage the respondent's estate and financial affairs to prevent waste. They had done it. They had pulled the trigger on the nuclear option. They weren't just trying to take the house anymore. They were trying to take me. They were trying to declare me legally incompetent so they could sign the deeds themselves. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to put my head between my knees. Delusions regarding property ownership, they were using my defense, the fact that I claimed to own the house, as proof of my insanity. It was perfectly circular. If I fought for my rights, I was crazy. If I didn't fight, I lost the house. I called Dr. Evans, my therapist. They filed for guardianship. I choked out. Breathe. Gabriella. She said. Her voice was an anchor. This is a tactic. It is the last gasp of a losing side. But what if the judge believes them? I asked. My parents look so normal. Doctor, Evans spoke firmly. You are employed. You are paying your bills. You have a lawyer. You have a therapist who will testify that you are fully competent. This filing is malicious abuse of process, and we will prove it. I called David next. He was furious. I had never heard him yell before, but I heard him slam his hand on his desk. This is retaliation, he shouted, pure and simple. They are trying to bypass the eviction court because they know they are losing. I am going to file a motion to dismiss this so fast their heads will spin. But the hearing, I said, the eviction hearing is tomorrow. David took a breath. We bring this into the eviction hearing, he said. We show the judge. We say, look, Your Honor. First they forged a deed, then they forged a service. Now they are trying to strip her of her civil rights. This is not a property dispute. This is a siege. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep. I sat on my living room floor with my binder. I added the new section, guardianship petition. I looked at the document. I looked at the signatures of my parents. They were shaky. They were destroying their own child because they were afraid of losing money. It was that simple, and it was that horrific. I thought about the cash for keys offer. I could have taken the $25,000. I could be in a hotel right now, sleeping. But if I had taken the money, I would have signed a paper saying I was crazy. I would have validated their lie. I stood up. I walked through the house. I touched the walls. I touched the windowsill where I put my plants. I touched the scratches on the floor from when I moved the couch in. This was my home, not because I had a deed, though I did, but because I had lived in it. I had built a life in it. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I looked older than I had a month ago. There were lines around my eyes. My jaw was tighter. But the fear was gone. The trembling panic of the first morning was gone. I wasn't a scared daughter anymore. I was a litigant. I put on my suit, the navy blue one. I packed my bag, laptop, water bottle, and the binder, the 3-inch thick binder that held the truth. I drove to the courthouse. The sun was shining. It was a beautiful, crisp morning. I saw my parents' car in the parking lot. I saw them walking toward the entrance. My mother was holding my father's arm. They looked frail. They looked like two people who were drowning and trying to climb on top of someone else to breathe. I didn't walk over to them. I didn't wave. I walked to the metal detectors. I put my bag on the belt. I walked through the scanner. It didn't beep. I picked up my bag. I felt the weight of the binder in my hand. It was heavy, but I could carry it. I walked toward courtroom 4B. I wasn't walking to my execution. I was walking to my testimony. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The smell of floor wax hit me. Let's begin, I thought. The courtroom was not the sterile, empty box I had expected. It was full. Every bench in the gallery was occupied. I saw Elias, the teacher whose mother's house had been stolen. I saw Joy, the nurse. I saw Sarah from the tenant nonprofit, sitting in the front row with a notepad on her knee. And behind them, I saw faces I didn't know. People who had heard about the case at the library. People who were fighting their own silent wars against LLCs and hidden investors. They were not there to protest. They were there to witness. I sat at the defense table next to David Park. My binder was in front of me. To my right, at the plaintiff's table, sat Mr. Sterling, the silver-haired attorney with the honey voice. Behind him sat my parents. My mother was wearing black, as if she were attending a funeral. My father was staring straight ahead at the judge's bench, his jaw set so hard I could see the muscle twitching in his cheek. They did not look at me. Judge Holloway entered. The bailiff called out, "All rise." We stood. The rustle of fabric filled the room. The judge took her seat. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp as she scanned the packed gallery. "Case number 24-CV0042, she read. OBS Holdings, LLC versus Gabriella Murphy and all unauthorized occupants. This is a hearing on the defendant's motion to set aside default judgment." Mr. Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked confident, the picture of reasonable authority. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is simple. Despite the theatrics the defense may attempt today, the defendant is an unauthorized occupant of the property. She was properly served with a summons. She failed to appear. A default judgment was entered. Now, facing the reality of eviction, she is grasping at straws to delay the inevitable. We ask the court to lift the stay and restore possession to the rightful owner immediately." He sat down. It took him less than 30 seconds. It was the strategy of minimization. Nothing to see here, just a squatter making noise. David Park stood up. He didn't button his jacket. He walked to the podium and placed his hands on the wood. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is many things, but simple is not one of them. We are not here to delay. We are here to prove that the judgment was obtained through fraud on the court. And we are here to prove that the plaintiff does not own the property at all." David picked up a document from our evidence stack. Exhibit A. He said, "The affidavit of service, the process server, Mr. Gary Miller, swears he handed the papers to Mrs. Murphy at her home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on January 12th. David turned to the projector screen. "This is a time-stamped receipt from a coffee shop 20 miles away from the property, dated January 12th at 4:10 in the afternoon. And this is a badge access log from Ms. Murphy's employer, showing she swiped out of her office parking garage at 6:30 in the evening." Mr. Sterling jumped up. "Objection. Hearsay. These are business records." "Your Honor," David said calmly, "authenticated by affidavit from the security director of the company. Unless Ms. Murphy has the ability to teleport. She was not at her front door when Mr. Miller says she was." Judge Holloway looked at the receipt. She looked at the affidavit. She made a note. "Continue." She said, "David moved to the second point. The plaintiff claims title based on a corrective quitclaim deed, recorded on January 12th. This deed purports to add the LLC as a co-owner. It was notarized by a Mr. Robert Vance." David paused. The silence in the room stretched thin. "Mr. Vance's notary commission expires in June of 2026. However, Mr. Vance himself expired in November of last year." A ripple of sound went through the gallery. A collective intake of breath. David projected the obituary. The smiling face of an elderly man appeared on the screen. Next to the date of his death. Your Honor, David said, a dead man cannot notarize a deed. This document is a forgery, and because the eviction is based on this deed, the eviction is fruit of the poisonous tree, Mr. Sterling stood up slowly. Your Honor, this is a collateral attack on title. This is an eviction court. We deal with possession. If there are technical defects in the notarization, those are matters for a civil quiet title action, not a summary proceeding. The plaintiff holds the recorded deed. That is presumptive proof of ownership. Technical defects? David shot back. The notary was deceased. That is not a typo. That is a crime. Judge Holloway raised her hand. Mr. Sterling, she said. Her voice had lost its procedural boredom. It was now cold and precise. Are you suggesting that this court should enforce a writ of possession based on a document that appears to be facially fraudulent? I am suggesting that the plaintiff purchased the property in good faith. Mr. Sterling said, sweating slightly. They relied on the documents provided by the family. If there was an error in the recording process, let's talk about the recording process. David interrupted. He projected the vendor logs. User, C_Murphy_guest. IP address, 24.15.112.88. The deed was not recorded by a title company. David said, it was uploaded through the plaintiff's own vendor portal, and the login used belongs to a guest account accessed from the home of Charles and Elena Murphy. David pointed to my parents. The plaintiff didn't just rely on the documents, Your Honor. The plaintiff gave the defendant's parents the keys to the digital backdoor to upload them. Judge Holloway turned her gaze to my parents. My father shifted in his seat. My mother was clutching a handkerchief, staring at her lap. I want to hear from the parents, Judge Holloway said. Mr. Sterling hesitated. Your Honor, they are not parties to this eviction. They are listed as the trustees in the underlying documents, the judge snapped, and they are present in my courtroom. Put Charles Murphy on the stand. My father walked to the witness box. He looked older than he had at the restaurant. He raised his right hand. He swore to tell the truth. Mr. Murphy, David Park began. Did you upload the corrective deed on January 12th? My father cleared his throat. I don't know the technical terms. I was working with the company. They said we needed to update the title to secure the financing. What financing? David asked. The loan. My father said, the bridge loan. And why did you need a bridge loan? My father looked at Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling stared at the ceiling. To help Gabriella, my father said. He looked at the judge, his eyes wide and sincere. My daughter was in financial trouble. She was overwhelmed. We stepped in to save the equity in the house before she lost it to foreclosure. David walked back to the table and picked up the credit report. Mr. Murphy, are you aware that your daughter has a credit score of 780? Are you aware she has never missed a mortgage payment? She forgets things, my father burst out. She says she pays them, but she is unstable. We couldn't take the risk. David picked up the hidden lien, the $350,000 note to Vanguard Distressed Asset Fund. Is this the loan you secured? David asked. Yes. And who received the proceeds of this loan? Did the money go to Gabriella's account? My father went silent. No, he said softly. Where did it go? Mr. Murphy? It went to the trust, he said, to cover family obligations. David projected the bank transfer record we had subpoenaed. It showed the money moving from the trust to a margin account at a brokerage firm. It went to cover your day trading losses. Didn't it? David asked. Objection. Mr. Sterling yelled. Relevance. Goes to motive. Your Honor, David said. The witness claims he evicted his daughter to save her. The evidence suggests he evicted her to liquidate her asset to cover his own bad debts. Overruled, Judge Holloway said. Answer the question. My father slumped. It was as if the air had been let out of him. I was going to pay it back, he whispered. I just needed 6 months. If I could sell the house, I could clear the margin call and have enough left over to buy her a condo. I was trying to fix it, By forging her signature? David asked. I had power of attorney, my father shouted. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. The general POA with the blank date. She signed it. She gave me the authority. David took the paper. This document is undated. Mr. Murphy, and we have testimony that it was signed years ago for medical contingencies. Did you fill in the date yourself? I don't remember. And the deed? The dead notary? Did you stamp that yourself? My father looked at the gallery. He saw the faces of the strangers. He saw the judgment in their eyes. I didn't know he was dead. My father said, It was an old stamp. I found it in a drawer. I thought it was just a formality. The deal was real. The money was real. The paperwork was just red tape, a formality. He called a felony a formality. David sat down. No further questions. Judge Holloway looked at my father with an expression of profound distaste. You may step down. Mr. Murphy, but do not leave the building. Then she looked at me. Mrs. Murphy, take the stand. I walked to the box. My legs felt heavy, but my hands were steady. I sat down. The microphone was cold in front of my face. Gabriella, David asked, did you authorize your parents to sell your house? No. Did you know about the loan? No. Did you know you were being evicted before the deputy knocked on your door? No. David paused. He looked at me with a softness he hadn't used with my father. Why did you give them copies of your identification? Why did you sign those blank forms years ago? I looked at my parents. My mother was weeping now, silent, shaking sobs. My father was looking at the floor, because I wanted them to be happy. I said, my voice was quiet, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the room. I wanted to be the good daughter. They always made me feel like I owed them something, like my independence was a betrayal. So I gave them pieces of myself to keep the peace. I gave them keys. I gave them forms. I gave them trust. I took a breath. I thought if I let them feel needed, they would love me. But they didn't want to be needed. They wanted to be in control. I looked at the judge. When the sheriff came that morning, I wasn't just scared of losing my roof. I was scared because I knew, deep down, who had sent him. I knew my parents had decided that my house was worth more than my safety. The courtroom was silent. No one moved. Thank you. Gabriella, David said. Mr. Sterling stood up for cross-examination. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Ms. Murphy, he said, you admit you signed the power of attorney? I signed it 5 years ago before a surgery. I said, but you never revoked it? No. I didn't think I had to revoke my parents. Mr. Sterling sighed. No further questions. I stepped down. David stood up for the final piece of the puzzle. Your Honor, we have one last exhibit. This was produced yesterday pursuant to your order regarding the third-party subpoena to Oak Bridge's compliance department. He handed a document to the bailiff. It was an email chain. From compliance@oakbridgeps.com to j_sterling@legalmail.com. Date, January 14th. Subject, Murphy file. Red flag. Jerry, the Murphy file is messy. The notary stamp is flagged in our system as expired/deceased. The uploader IP is residential. We are getting too many defaults in that county with similar fact patterns. If she fights this, we need to cut bait. Do not let this go to discovery. Offer cash for keys. We can't afford a pattern and practice audit right now. The courtroom erupted. A low murmur turned into a buzz of conversation. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. Order. She looked at the email. She looked at Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, she said. Her voice was dangerously quiet. You are the Jerry on this email? Mr. Sterling pulled at his collar. I receive many emails, Your Honor. I can't verify. You represent the parents, the judge said. Yet you are corresponding with the plaintiff's compliance department about cutting bait? She slammed the file shut. This hearing is over. She leaned forward. I am setting aside the default judgment immediately. The writ of possession is quashed. Miss Murphy, you remain in your home. She turned to Mr. Sterling. I am referring this matter to the State Bar for an investigation into your conflicts of interest, and I am referring the record of this case, specifically the testimony of Mr. Murphy and the vendor logs, to the District Attorney's Office for review regarding forgery, identity theft, and elder fraud. She looked at my father. You claimed you wanted to save the house. Mr. Murphy, you nearly destroyed your daughter to do it. And to the plaintiff, OBS Holdings, I am issuing an order to show cause why they should not be sanctioned $50,000 for filing a fraudulent instrument. She stood up. Court is adjourned. The gavel hit the wood. It sounded like a gunshot. The gallery broke into applause. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was the sound of people who had been waiting a long time to see a giant fall. Elias was cheering. Sarah was hugging Joy. I didn't cheer. I sat in my chair, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving me feeling hollowed out and light, like a husk. David put his hand on my shoulder. We won. Gabriella, it is over. I looked at the empty judge's bench. Is it? I asked. The legal part is, he said. The rest. That is up to you. I stood up and packed my binder. I walked toward the aisle. My parents were standing there. They couldn't leave yet. The bailiff was waiting to escort them to a side room, presumably to talk to the detective who had been waiting in the back. Gabriella, my mother said. She reached out a hand. I stopped. I didn't recoil. I just stood out of reach. We didn't mean for it to go this far, she said. Her face was streaked with mascara. We just got in over our heads. Please, tell them not to arrest Dad. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, who had fed me, and who had tried to have me declared insane to cover a gambling debt. I can't tell them that. I said, because it wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a choice. Gabby, my father said, he looked small. He looked like an old man. What are we going to do? I don't know. I said, you should probably listen to your lawyer, if you still have one. I stepped around them. And Mom? I said. She looked up, hope flashing in her eyes. Do not come to my house. Do not call my phone. If you want to speak to me, call David. If you show up at my door, I will call the police again. But we are your family, she wailed. I looked at Elias and Joy waiting for me by the doors. I looked at Sarah. I know, I said, and that is the saddest part of all. I walked out of the courtroom. I drove home in silence. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the lawns of Ridgeway Glen. It looked exactly like it had on the morning the sheriff came. The same manicured grass, the same quiet streets, but the world had changed. Or rather, my eyes had changed. I pulled into my driveway. I saw Mrs. Gable watering her hydrangeas. She waved. I waved back. I walked to my front door. I unlocked it with my key. I stepped inside. The air was stale. The do not discard box was still sitting in the living room. The wall of deeds and sticky notes was still there. A monument to my trauma. I walked to the wall. I started peeling off the tape. I took down the dead notary. I took down the timeline. I took down the vendor logs. I threw them in the recycling bin. I wasn't triumphant. I didn't feel like jumping up and down. I felt a profound, heavy quiet. I had my house, but I had lost my history. I had lost the safety net of believing that, no matter what, I had a home to go back to. I was truly, completely independent now. I went to the kitchen and made tea. I sat at the table where my parents had sat with their casserole and their lies. I took out my phone. I had a text from Sarah. We are organizing a class action against Oakbridge. We want you to be the lead plaintiff. Are you in? I looked at the message. I could walk away. I could sell the house, take the equity, and move to a different state. I could disappear. But I thought about the woman with the cane at the library. I thought about the people who didn't have a David Park, or a badge log, or the stubbornness to fight back. I typed my reply. I am in. I put the phone down. I sipped my tea. It was hot and strong. I looked around my house, my walls, my floor, my life. It was broken. Yes. There were holes in the plaster where I had hung the evidence. There were ghosts in the guest room. But it was mine. I stood up and went to the front door. I engaged the deadbolt. It clicked with a solid, heavy sound. For the first time in months, the lock wasn't to keep the sheriff out. It was to keep my peace in. I was rebuilding. It would be slow. It would be lonely sometimes. But the foundation, the real foundation, not the concrete under the house, but the steel in my spine, was solid. I was Gabriella Murphy, and I was authorized to be here. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey into the dark side of trust and paperwork, and I hope it resonated with you. I would love to know, where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment and let me know. And if you enjoyed Gabriella's fight for justice, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of grit and redemption. Share your thoughts in English in the comments below. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary with family? How did you handle it? Until next time, keep your deeds recorded and your doors locked.